just got to do one more thing and they'll be able to start the interview.
Well, hello and welcome to everybody. We've got an exciting discussion today. Something people have been waiting for quite a while. Dear brother Cosmic, the Cosmic Prankster, is going to give us some of the sneak preview of his occult philosophy and of his system. Think of it as a magical system, as a channel
All right,
system.
we're good.
Lovely. And so, for those of you that don't know, Cosmic Prankster is a you can think of him as a medium, and he channels the Fae. And he's been working with the Fae for quite some time now. I think it might be as long as a couple of years, or at least close to.
I've been probably seriously working with the Fae since 2019. There's kind of like weird sort of echoes in the past. See, that's the thing with the Fae that I've kind of like been thinking about lately. It's not so much that they just showed up. It's kind of like they showed up and then they kind of like looked back into my past and they showed me the signs of like they've always been here. It's one of those kind of dynamics.
That makes a lot of sense, because they wouldn't just rock up out of nowhere and go, hello.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello. Ooh. We come in peace. It's not quite Star Trek. So, yeah, he's been channeling an entire system of magical law, which is really from the ground up. It's quite a fascinating journey we're going to go on tonight. Totally looking forward to it.
Well, you're going
and we're going to throw you into the deep end. Welcome, dear Cosmic. It's an honor to have you on the show. And
Lovely
tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am the Cosmic Prankster, of course, and like BushWhisperer said, I channeled the Fae. But before I channeled the Fae, I've tried other occult systems before. I was a Buddhist at one point. There was a point where I tried, was very into Western magic, played with Golden Dawn, Thelema, Gnosticism. I dabbled in chaos magic. There was a time where I was a strict sort of like a dream yoga idealist. So, you know, a lot of people, they kind of give people crap when they say you start out your own system. It's like, oh, well, you haven't learned from, you know, the old stuff. And like, I have, like, before I started working with the Fae, there was a good solid, like 10 years. So maybe not, I'm not like a, you know, like a yogi or like a full-on wizard here, but there was a good 10 years where I studied Western and Eastern magic. So I'm not completely illiterate when it comes to a lot of these topics. And what's interesting about the system is it's actually taken a lot of those old belief systems and it's recontextualized them in a completely new way. So that's been interesting. As for the actual, I guess I should probably just kind of start with how this whole, the experience that started this whole thing. So I had been working, before I worked with the Fae, I was working with through the divine feminine and sort of like, you know, Gaia, Mother Nature, kind of like almost like a druid magic. Like that was kind of the thing before that. And then, I don't know, like I think what really first started out was like, I just had this sort of, I think it was like tripping one night and I had this psychedelic experience on Morning Glories. And I was in this, it was in the middle of the night. I was hanging out with a friend and it was really cold outside. I think it was the middle of January. And I remember like he lives out in like this big farm area. So it's just this big open field. And on the side of the field, there's there's all these like pine trees, these coniferous trees. And I remember sort of going into these pine trees to feel warmth. And I felt this like nature presence there. I didn't really know what to make much of it at first. And it just kind of like, that was the seed that got it started rolling. So then, you know, I'd already been channeling entities before I worked with the Fae. Mostly like my first thing was I actually started with Aphrodite. And I worked with, you know, I was already used to working with feminine intelligences. So, you know, there's times where like in your head you have certain fantasies, you have certain like dreams, and I was having these sort of internal conversations with these beings, and it was at a point where I was just kind of testing it out. You know, maybe they're real, maybe they're just a thought form, but this is fun, so I'm just kind of going along with it. Still, you know, a little bit agnostic. Like I've always had some level of skepticism in my life, even as of now, but there was a time where I was just like a complete skeptic. Like I didn't believe in any kind of magic or supernatural stuff. Like there was a point when I was a teenager, I was a full-blown atheist. But so if we want to know about my faith system, there should also talk about the actual faith spirits in general. So the main two entities that I would talk to was Kathiza and Vivuka. But the one that's been teaching me all this magic system is one named Slazithia. And so it's kind of like, I'm jumping all over the place here. But the main experience that started off that really got me like, oh man, I really need to take this seriously and like go deep, there was a time where I was channeling, working with these faith spirits, working with Kathiza specifically, and I use what's known as Randonautica. And what Randonautica is, it's like it's an app on one's phone that takes data and information from a quantum number generator, and then it uses that data to calculate a coordinate on the GPS near your area, and it'll decide to take you a random spot near where you live. So, for example, let's say you use this app and your intention was purple. The idea would be that the app would work is if it took you location with tons of purple stuff, or maybe one really prominent purple object. And I did this with my intention was magical portal. And at the time when I was walking up to this location, I was talking with Kathiza, one of the Fae, probably the one I probably have the closest relationship with. And we were talking about orbs and using sort of like crystal scrying balls to travel to different dimensions. And the thing she mentioned was you stare at the ball while holding it out in your hand and you spin around in a circle. Now, so that's just kind of like what we were talking about at the time. And then probably in the span of less than 15 minutes before I hit this location. And when I get to the location, I kid you not, there's this big fairy statue holding an orb. And I'm like, oh my God, man, like, are you kidding me? Not only is it a fairy, but it's like specific to the conversation I was just having. This is not, my brain at that point could not say this is just random chance. This has to be something because it's just too specific, too unlikely for this to happen. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's certain coincidences where you're just like, I don't think random chance can explain this because it's just too improbable. It defies, probability. And so from that point on, like I channeled the alphabet, and then from the alphabet, I learned about the concept of Zerfaxes and Zarfaxes, which is basically a kind of it's a kind of, if you look at the world as a sort of a mental space, like it's consciousness. This is a way, Zerfaxes and Zarfaxes are essentially a way to measure that consciousness in a way that's not physical. So it's not like three-dimensional or hold on. Before I do anything, I'm going to show my first picture.
Good idea.
So
it will give people a bit of context to what you're talking about.
So this right here, this is the Fae alphabet I channeled. And each one of these symbols that I'm pointing to with my mouse has a specific sort of like they're correlated to a certain thing, they have certain qualities and traits. But you basically, like, to form words, you just combine these sort of things into different words, and you can come up with magical spells that way. And the interesting thing too is you can actually use this language for in real life words. So if you wanted to, let's say you want to do the word tree, for example, you would take like Theo, which would be the T sound, and then you have a R, which is your R sound, and you combine these two symbols and you would spell tree. And like this is a way to make sigils. It's a way to do that. But yeah, and this is like how I actually, derive their names. Like, for example, Kathiza, you have like Kuth, Eth, Zith, Ah, or if you want to do Vivuka, you take the Vith, U, Kuth, Ah. And so basically you can use that to extrapolate different words, different concepts. And this tool has been kind of like, this is basically the snowball that kind of got the whole magical system started. And then, So yeah, that's a good little introduction there, I think, just to get
If
the
you could
ball
keep
rolling.
that alphabet up while we're
Oh,
talking, it's
sure.
quite interesting for people to get a feel for it, because I think
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
worth
sure.
looking at
Yeah.
the
Do that.
alphabet. It's interesting, isn't it?
All right.
Especially when you were talking about tree. I take it
Mhm.
each of those have a meaning of sorts, right?
Yeah, they do actually, and they have. They're also they refer to different states of consciousness. They refer to certain types of places in the world, or astral realms, or physical realms. Like, for example, the symbol phi over here, which is the one with the plus sign with the four orbs. This is the Zerfax. Okay, so I should also break down that these symbols are called Zerfaxes, right? And a Zerfax is essentially like I have to see. This is the thing why it's so hard to talk about this, is because there's so many different like angles and like things you can talk about in this, and you can kind of, it's easy to kind of like, go off on random tangents and not be focused. But so basically,
Well,
this is okay. Let me simplify this and just sort of describe what these things, the qualities of this. So this symbol right here, this represents like hard physical matter, and then you have like this right here, Vlid. This represents like chaos, glitches, nonsensical dreams, the kind of the chaotic aspect. And then Sli, this represents nonlinear time. And then you have Yo, which represents color, music. You have Ni, that's linear time. And so and then you have like stuff like Kith, which is sort of like organic things, bodies, trees, physical somatic sensations. And then you have, so each one of these 23 symbols does have a certain meaning. And they have they have a lot of different meanings. They're kind of almost like tesseracts, in that they have a whole bunch of different functions and things that you can use or whatever. There's a lot of
I
different
find it
applications.
I find it quite interesting that you've ended up with 23
Mm-hmm.
of these, like the 23 pairs of chromosomes.
Yeah.
And when we look at the Kabbalah, for example, we look at the 22 archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
When we take this in terms of the major arcana, right? We
Uh-huh.
speak about the 21 numerations,
Mm-hmm.
with the fool occupying a place both at the beginning and the end of the story, which brings us to that 23 as
Speaking of the
22's
fool,
mystic number
I want to
thereof.
show you
Yeah.
something really cool that this will actually probably help you understand the Zerfaxes a little bit better. I actually had them allocated to tarot cards so that you can kind of get like so this is some of them are not quite like on to on ratio, but this kind of helps you this might be a good little help starting kind of thing to help you kind of understand what each of the symbols mean. So for example, Zith, this is the one that looks like a crystal ball. This is associated with dreams, sort of the realm you go to when you astral project. And I associated that with the moon card because it is a very sort of like lunar symbol. And like I mentioned, Vlid before being the symbol of chaos. That's why I associated with the devil card. And the Ni, this is the symbol that represents linear time. So I figured it made sense to pair it with the chariot, which represents a sort of forward momentum.
Very interesting the way you've allocated that.
Mm-hmm.
And so where's the fool?
The Fool is by O, which is the Black Void Zerfax, because it's in a sense this is the symbol that kind of represents sort of like a blank state of mind when you close your eyes and you meditate. You're just kind of, your mind is just kind of random. You're kind of like drifting off. You're kind of just like, actually I feel like O could also be, the Fool could also be for Vlid. I feel like that would make sense too. So yeah, what I said, like these tarot cards, this is not like, I'm not really fully satisfied with these associations, but this is sort of the best that I could come up with, just to kind of like, help people who are into the Western magic system, kind of give them a little sort of like a toehold into understanding what these symbols are. So I think before I do anything, I want to explain what a Zerfax actually is. And this is sort of the... so if we think of a Zerfax, I'm actually going to go back, stop sharing. I'm actually going to show myself for a second here, just to kind of illustrate a point. So if I look at my room around me and my perception, this is a single Zerfax that I'm existing in. And the edges of the Zerfaxes are the walls around me. Anything that is outside of my wall is allocated to an alternate Zerfax. So there's a Zerfax in this room, which I mentally perceive. And then there's the mental perception that there's a room outside of my room, which then creates another Zerfax. So you, BushWhisperer, also exist in your own Zerfax. And I'm in a different Zerfax, but this computer, this internet that we're working, acts as an intermediary Zerfax that connects the two of our Zerfaxes together like a current or a channel. And that would be what's known as it'd be the live Zerfax, the connector Zerfax. So the definition I have for Zerfax is it's a sort of fourth dimensional experience sphere. And what's fascinating about Zerfax, it's like basically like a place. Everything, a room is a Zerfax, a forest could be a Zerfax, but an entire galaxy could also be a Zerfax. It's a sort of, it's not a physical measurement. There's no sense of like it's being too short or being too long. It's more like if I have a sort of like, whatever I see around me, that where my eyes stretch to the farthest depths of the sky, to the farthest edge of the horizon, that's one Zerfax. And then everything outside of my peripheral vision, everything that I don't see around me is a Zerfax that exists outside of it. So like I said, you could have a Zerfax that's just, one closet, a broom closet. And then everything outside of that is another Zerfax. But you could have a Zerfax that's the size of the entire Grand Canyon. So the thing about Zerfax is it's not a measurement of physical distance. It's a measurement of more like conceptual, spiritual distance, if that makes any sense. So you can also think of Zerfaxes in terms of information and ideas and concepts. So if you think about numbers, for example, you think of the numbers 1 and 2. Conceptually, the numbers 1 and 2 are one Zerfax apart, right? But if I have 1 and 3, conceptually, these two concepts are two Zerfaxes apart. Because if you think about it, and you can really just take the Zerfax concept and apply it to all sorts of different things when it comes to space, the body, music, belief systems, alternate dimensions. That's the big thing. What interesting thing about Zerfax is that you use them as a way to sort of measure extra dimensional space. Now, and then I think one more thing I want to get into is the concept of the Zarfex, which is why this whole thing I work on is called Zarfexology. So we take that Zerfax concept that I just mentioned, and that you and me with BushWhisperer, we live in different Zerfaxes, right? But we exist in the same Zarfex. We're all part of like one particular Zarfex. So the idea of a Zarfex is you take all the people in the universe, all the animals, all the conscious beings that are sort of creating their own Zerfax reality. The Zarfex is where all of those realities intersect into a massive hypersphere, sort of omega point. And the idea is that the part where all the realities overlap and intersect harmoniously, this is what's known as the Zarfex nucleus. So with every belief system or religion, everybody's sort of partially right. Everybody has some of the truth. But the Zarfex nucleus is sort of where all the truths intersect, and there's no, contradiction or overlapping. But what's interesting about this system is it's not saying that, the entire existence is one Zarfex. That no. We live in one Zarfex among many. And the way to access the Zarfex is what's known as the indeterminate zone. And now I think I need to present another diagram here.
While you do that, I'll break that down into a metaphor that I think people will be able to understand very easily. So a Zarfex could be considered as an operating system, and a Zerfex could be considered as an app on your computer, right?
And somewhere
I'm
in the
one
ballpark.
app, you're in another app. We're all in a big operating system, which is a Zarfex. But there are many different kinds of Zarfexes.
Mm-hmm. I would say
like there are many different operating systems on the web.
Mm-hmm. I would say that the Zarfex is like one sort of internet cluster. Think of it more like a server base, and every individual computer accessing that's a Zarfex.
That's a good way. Yeah, exactly.
So here we have a sort of a map of a Zarfex for one sort of individual person. So the idea would be that I would have my own map for my personal self, and you would have a map, and they all kind of like, think of like a big circle, and all of them sort of like jutting out of the circle like petals on a flower, but it's more like a sphere. So anyway, when it comes to Zarfexes, every Zarfex has two halves. You have over here, which is known as the Zarfex interior, and then you have what's known over here is the indeterminate zone. So basically, you can think of that all of this is physical reality, and this is the sort of the astral, etheric, dream world part of it. And so the idea is basically here we start off. This is where the individual sits, right in the middle between the Zarfex interior and the indeterminate zone. And the idea is things reflect from one side to the other. So let's say, for example, so this is what's known as the Azerfax. This is sort of probably the most average Zerfax that most people inhabit. This represents actual physical space in the real mundane world. And this over here is known as the Zafriz, which is Zerfax spelled backwards. And this is sort of the direct dream-like reflection of the physical world into the astral plane. So the idea would be, I remember last week on our roundtable discussion, we were talking about how we create physical altars to sort of affect and come up with magical intent and so on and so forth. So the idea would be is that this is fixed and physical. That's why it's the Zarfex interior. And the indeterminate zone, it moves, it's changed, it's a lot more dynamic. It depends on what you're thinking about, what belief system you have, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea is if I build a physical shrine in this Zerfax and I have a magical intent behind that, it creates a physical link to this Zerfax over here. So if I have a sort of a magical intent, I can then take it. So the idea with this system is that magical intents start here in the indeterminate zone. And the idea is you want to create a channel so that it can make its way and get it and manifest itself into physical reality. And then the thing about the indeterminate zone is this is the way you access the outer Zarfexes, as mentioned over here. And this Z, where it's in this one big circle, this is the Zarfex nucleus that like everyone is connected to. This is just like, the ultimate, the ultimate reality. And it's interesting that I refer to this Zarfex as reality. And each one of these different sort of sectors represents different sort of states of consciousness. So this is like the high level up here when we got the Fifth Zerfax channel. And so this is basically representative of, psychedelic states or deep, powerful, transcendental states. This is we are all one Zerfax. So if you think of the metaphor for something like an LSD trip, for example, you would go up here in this channel, and depending upon the intensity of the substance is how far into the zone. So if you're just doing a very mild threshold dose, you would be here. If you do a moderate dose, you would be here. If you do more of a really strong dose, you're here. And if you're doing like a full-blown DMT breakthrough, then you're over here. And the idea is these four Zerfax here, these are the gateways to the outer Zarfexes, and they lead to different types of Zarfexes. So The idea would be that you essentially, to transfer over there, you take your Zerfax, but you blend it with the Zarfex that you're going to. So, for example, the Zarfex where the Fey beings I come from is called Ezethia, and in that world, the sky has this sort of like purple. No, the sky is like yellow, and there's like this infinite yellow space, and the grass is purple. So the idea is, if I take something like my backyard, for example, but I change the colors of it so that instead of green grass and a blue sky, you have purple grass and a yellow sky. This creates a kind of a link to this world that you sort of slingshot with this. So you have your key and your gate, and you slingshot it over to the outer Zarfexes. And so, and then there's also different types of Zarfexes as well. But any questions that need anything else I can explain, or anything that just like strikes your eye that you're curious about? The numbers?
What are the numbers that I see?
The numbers represent the level of depth.
And then are those the letters?
Basically, it's like level 1, level 2. So this represents indeterminate zone, level 1, indeterminate zone, level 2, indeterminate zone, level 3, and level 4. And on this side, it's Zarfex interior level 1, Zarfex interior level 2, 3, and then this is the Zarfex nucleus over here. And the idea is that each one is kind of like there's direct reflection where it's like, so that's the thing about this sim. It's like the law of reflection. This Zaphra's over here, as you indicated, the Zaphra's channel. This is the Zerfax that reflects consciousness. So if I have a dream, it reflects adjacent to these other Zerfaxes. So it goes from, there's this direct reflection where when you're, so let's say, for example, I was talking about my room before. That would be the A Zerfax. That would be the room I'm sitting in. But the U A Zerfax is basically my understanding that, okay, I live in America. There are roads. I'm on planet Earth in the Milky Way galaxy in a solar system. So this right here represents all the places you've actually physically been to that you can sort of remember by driving to. And this is the stuff where you would have to take a road map or a GPS to figure out where you're going. So the idea is there's that Zerfax where it's like, okay, this is my muscle member. So think of it like this. If you have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and it's pitch black, but you don't necessarily need to turn on the light because you kind of instinctively know where the bathroom is just by your footsteps and sort of feeling the physical location. That's what this Zerfax represents. It's muscle memory. And then this is sort of the collective knowledge that you understand, like your geography, what your understanding is. And these are allocated into 2 different Zerfaxes. And then, but it does, so that would be an example of something from one Zerfax reflecting to an adjacent Zerfax. But there is also like things that correspond with Zerfax interior level 1 correspond with level 1, and then things in level 2 correspond with level 2. So if we take that, so remember how I said this before is these 2 are direct reflections of each other. So this is like, so this would be like your bedroom, and this is your bedroom in the astral plane, right? And then, so if we take from the level 2 reflection, this represents all of the locations that you know about, that you've watched on television, you've read in history books, you've read in astronomy books. And then it reflects here to the Vlid Zerfax. So when people have like nonsensical dreams where it's just sort of like, oh, I was at school and there was like a talking cat and Elvis was there and it didn't make sense. That's what happens in this Zerfax. So the idea is that it's taking all this stuff from here and then it sort of scrambles and meshes it up as it reflects, creating this. So that's the idea of basically one of the key concepts in this system is sort of what they call the law of echoes, or the law of reflection, where what happens in one Zerfax will reflect into the adjacent Zerfaxes.
Okay, so I'm
I
curious.
know that's a lot of information, so feel free to ask any questions. I understand this is a lot to go over.
So I'm looking at your channels here, and I'm seeing that you've got the channels on the left, I take it that the channels on the left only encompass ZN and ZI13. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically that's sort of the idea, is that they're basically these are the physical channels on the left, and these are the astral channels on the right.
So all of those 8 blocks, 8 parts represent effectively.
I know it's technically 7, because the interesting thing about the Kizerfax channel is it exists in both the physical and the astral. This is the channel that acts as sort of the bridge between the two worlds.
Okay, interesting. And then on the other side, we've got the Xaphras and the
I guess you could pronounce it.
Can't pronounce names very well. Sorry.
Yeah, it's Ethzerfax, Kidзerfax,
Yeah.
Vidzerfax.
So what does the
Kidзerfax
represent?
is basically isolated images and concepts. So let's say I have my bedroom. So in Ethzerfaxal form, instead of my bedroom being connected to a house, an outside world, think of that bedroom instead. It's like a box floating in an infinite black void. So this is the Ethzerfax channel is essentially the black void channel. So this is
pure symbolic.
Conversely, so like I mentioned before, when I said this is like for LSD and psilocybin is the Vidzerfax channel. This would be more like your ketamine channel, where you're disassociated from reality. You're disassociated from your body. You're just sort of floating in a kind of an empty space, and there's a lot of little other floating ideas happening around. So what's interesting, they're kind of opposites of each other. So in the Vidzerfax channel, everything is super interconnected. Everything is very fractal. Everything is sort of mushed together. Whereas in the Ethzerfax channel, it's a bunch of sort of like floating island worlds, sort of like floating around in space. And so the idea is, with this channel, for level 1 Ethzerfax, this is like just your isolated images. So if you think of like a bird, an image of a bird and a black background, that would be an example of something that's like an Ethzerfax. It's a still image. And then when you go to the Ethzafras, the images start to kind of like melt into each other. They start to blend and reflect into each other, creating all kinds of like weird, like maybe even nightmarish imagery. The Ethzerfax channel tends to be kind of where like the nightmares happen. Of course, the nightmares I think actually probably more happen up here in the Vidzerfax channel. So here's a good way to think of the Ethzerfax channel. The Xaphras channel is the dream channel. This is where you go when you dream at night. And the Ethzerfax channel, these are the sort of the isolated building blocks or Legos that build the dreams. So if you ever had like a dream where you're in a dream and then you exit the dream and you're sort of in a black space, then you enter another dream, it's sort of like that. So like, let's say you're dreaming that you're in a grocery store of some kind, and then everything goes black and you're just sort of by yourself, then you're over here. But let's say, oh, now I get an image of an outdoor swimming pool. Then you would see that outdoor swimming pool is an Ethzerfax. You enter it, and then you come up here into the Xaphras, where now you're in a fully enmeshed dream world. So the best way to think of this is like this channel is all the sort of the ideas and images and sensations that are sort of like floating around in space, but haven't quite found a sort of a home or a place within the Zarfex yet. This is kind of like, so another way to think of a Zarfex is it's like an organism. And there are certain things that Zarfex, there's certain rules and certain aspects that correspond to the world we live in. And the Ether and the indeterminate zone acts as a filter. So let's say we have a unicorn in the indeterminate zone. It comes from another Zarfex, we have the Deo Zarfex channel. So you got the unicorn here, and then it goes over here, and then it gets kind of caught up into the dream world. But the problem is that we don't necessarily have, unicorns in real life. So what happened, in order for it to manifest into the Zarfex interior, it may come up as a picture of a unicorn. It might be just an actual regular horse. So something does essentially manifest into the world, but it goes through a filtration process before it enters, because if something happens where it defies the laws of physics, and which is represented by this Zerfax phi, and it starts to break, and there's contradictions that happen, that can be really disastrous. And reality, apparently, which is a disturbing realization, is that reality can kind of fall apart in certain places. So, and this is basically sort of the high level Zerfax in the physical reality. So phi Zerfax, that would basically be sort of like your quantum singularity. So all the sort of the parallel universes and all the potential realities all sort of exist within here. And so I guess I would also, now, like, what else do you want me to go over, Shaman? So I'm kind of like thinking of like, there's so many directions I could take this.
So just to understand, what I'm trying to figure out. So I see that those two, what I'm calling the black eggs within a 4 element, those are obviously like platforms where you change between trains, if you would consider it in such a crude way, right?
You know,
and the train of thought
it is kind of a liminal space, because here's what's interesting. When you take a substance to sort of end, there's multiple ways to enter the indeterminate. So you can do it through altered states, and you can do it through meditation and dreaming, or even just like even sleep deprivation, which will take you here. But this is what's known as the O Zerfax. This is your void Zerfax. So this is basically a potential for, and that's why the ETH Zerfax has sort of come through out of here. So this is basically kind of like, it has all the stuff within a single infinite black void. And this is your perception of that. You're taking a specific image from here and then experiencing it through here. But what I noticed, though, is that when I go into altered states, there is a kind of a brief sort of intermediary period where my mind is just like completely blank. This is usually before I start to hear the voices and get the visions and figure things out. And yeah, you're right. This is a kind of a transitory sort of space, but it also represents. Should I go into this? Because I don't know if I want to go into alternate Zarfax types before, some of this stuff isn't explained, because I don't want to move too fast. So I know there's a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah. So I was just getting a grip on that, because I find it interesting that there's these 3 aspects. That's saying a lot to me. Then, okay, so we've got the ETH Zerfax channel, which seems to me to be a very, how can I put this? Disembodied, abstract sort of element.
Yeah.
Then we got the
Zafriz.
Zarfax.
It's Zerfax spelled backwards.
Yeah, it's easy. Can you say it for me?
Zafriz. So like
Zafriz.
Like frizz, like frizzy hair.
Zafriz.
Or
Zafriz.
Or Sliz pronounce it like Zafriz. So
Zafriz.
I pronounce it Zafriz.
Zafriz. That makes a lot more sense. And so the Zafriz is sort of the highly structured, possibly, and then the Kithzerfax would be the sort of.
The Kithzerfax channel, this is what's known as the organic Zerfax channel. So let's say in here you have a dream, but in the Kithzerfax channel you have a dream, but this time I can smell things, I can touch things, I can embody physical sensations. The Kithzerfax dream, it's a lot more real, it's a lot more vivid and organic. It's not as abstract. So, and then what's interesting is that it bridges between two. It goes on 2 sides. So there's the Kithzerfax side and the Zarfax interior, and then we have the Kithzerfax side in the indeterminate zone. It's because what's interesting, why the Azerfax channel and the Zafras channel are distinctive, is because there's the Izerfax channel that kind of creates a bridge in between. There's the sense that this is real, this is imaginary, and because there's that real imaginary divide, the channels are separated. But in the animal form, when one is in a more animalistic state, you're not making that distinction of this is false and this is reality. And so because of that, the two channels are interconnected. Does that make any sense?
Yes, absolutely. Because there's
Mm-hmm.
no distinction. There's no judgment.
There's not, yeah, it's something like that.
Pure experience.
Yeah,
And
it's also
so
why,
the
like,
so
when you
that's
go
the
into a,
zone of life force, right?
yeah, there's a life force to it. It's like the kids are facts.
Like the pranic field, if you would
It's weird because the
consider it
kids
as
are
such.
facts can represent your own individual physical body, but it also represents the actual external physical environment. So when you um so here's another perfect example. So when you're in the Aetherfax state, this can also represent towns, cities, places where there's structure, because the Aetherfax is also the symbol of like sort of symbols, built things, buildings, roads, etc., etc. Because it's a circuit, kind of like almost like a baseball diamond. And when you exit that and you go into, let's say, some kind of forest where there's no people around, there are no trails, you're just in pure primordial nature, you then move up to this Zerfax up here. That's sort of the idea. And then the idea is that this is the Riz Zerfax. This is so the thing to understand about these Zarfax channels is each one has a gate that corresponds with it. So for the Etherfax channel, you have the black void gate, the O Zerfax. So this black void allows for certain objects to kind of freely float in this kind of black space without, intersecting things. But then we move up for the Zafrich channel, you have the Dio Zerfax gate. And this is the void of a pure solid color. So maybe there'd be like a red void, a green void, and a blue void. And what these colored voids do is, because there's a life force in it, because there's an actual sort of energetic current, you have full landscapes that sort of grow out of it. Like, think of it like plants requiring light in order to grow. And that's kind of essentially what that is. Then you go up to the Rizerfax. This is the white void Zerfax gate. And this is really the kind of the life force, the sort of the consciousness that sort of emanates through the kid Zerfaxes. So this is kind of like, I guess you could say, like, this is sort of the clear white light. This is what many of the Kabbalists would probably consider Kether over here. And this sort of animates the kid Zerfaxes and gives them light. And then we move up to the Vid Zerfax channel. This is sort of like, so if we think of this as sort of the colors, and we think of this is the white where all the colors emanate from, you can think of the Deo Zerfax channel as all the colors and qualia that are within our comprehension through normal senses, like seeing colors, hearing sounds, smelling things. Here, up in here, these are colors and sensations that are beyond our 5 sense ranges. So this would be our synesthetic experiences, where you see colors, and where you see sounds and hear colors. Or it could also represent colors that exist outside of our physical vision, colors that are beyond our comprehension. And the reason there's a Z symbol here and there's a Z symbol here, this is sort of the Zarfex nucleus where everybody's consciousness sort of enters it. But the little Zith here sort of represents our imagination, so when we visualize something, the Zith is kind of the Zerfax of mystery and imagination. So up here, you actually have a Zith and Vith. So Zith is actually a masculine Zerfax, and Vith is a feminine Zerfax. And these two things are actually, so basically, let's say that you're taking a DMT trip, and you enter this Zerfax right here, the Zith Vith. But the thing is, this is a portal to here, the Zarfex nucleus. So a lot of times when people have that full-blown DMT trip, my theory is that they either go to here if they don't believe in the outer Zarfexes, but if they do believe in the outer Zarfex, they're able to go beyond this certain threshold. So the idea is, like, each channel is sort of like a different sort of level of consciousness. If you think about, if you move from, let's see, kind of like left to right, this is like the 4th dimension, and then up and down is like the 5th dimension. So you have a bunch of different stuff on this. You know, actually, the better way to think of this, instead of thinking of them as channels, think of them as planes, right? Like a plane, like an astral sort of like a astral plane, mental plane. And so this direction represents the depth you go into each sort of channeled state. And then the upward channel is like upward direction is like, I'm going to change to a whole different level of awareness. And then there's a level of depth for each one. I'll let you comment.
Yeah, it's very interesting because when I'm looking at this, it seems very much that the first channel on the bottom represents very much aspects of what becomes solidarity, even though it's not objectively physical. But it's like the raw materials, isn't it?
It's
like
I
the
would say
raw
it's the
material
mental
symbols of what are going to become objects without any real much to it.
Yeah, there's no corresponding it. It's kind of like they're sitting in the waiting room waiting to manifest into
Like a
physical
brick.
reality. Yeah, it's sort of like a brick.
Just a brick. It's just there. Where and then the other things are more conceptual, like light switches and door handles and doors and windows. Like it's now you've got a lot more utility with each of the objects as they sort of. So I look at this and I see it as sort of like physical element of obviously an earth element. And then it seems that the obvious the one where the inspiration is the one on the top, which seems like it's very much in breath and fire. And then it seems like the air element would be the quality, which is maybe what the green one represents. Yeah, the qualities of things. So when I think of the qualities, I think of the astral plane. When I think of the conceptual nature of things like Xafries, right? Then I'm thinking like in terms of etheric. And then when I think of the absolute nature of things, I'm thinking of the causal field, when that probably more would relate to the Vitsupras. Vitsuprex. Gosh, I want to speak Russian.
Facts.
You make me want to speak Russian, brother.
Yeah.
Only I can't speak Russian. But yeah,
that's the other thing too, is like the actual like language. There's sort of a way to kind of pronounce it. I'm actually gonna stop screen sharing for a second just so I can kind of show my face here. So when you pronounce these words, there's almost a kind of a buzzing nature to it. So when I say like a Z, what I do is I let's see, so you pronounce like a Z. So you kind of just sort of like very slightly sort of like put some pressure on your tongue with your teeth, just so that when you speak, there's a sort of you feel like an electrical vibration in your skull. So it's like, so then you almost like you take the Z and the TH sound, you try to pronounce them at the same time. So instead of like zeth, you do it this. Just feel that like buzz, like you'll feel yourself like actually sort of vibrating in a way. And the idea is when you try to like use the words magically, you keep that in mind when you're trying to pronounce them, to sort of like feel the electrical energy.
That makes a lot of sense, I suppose, especially with the Z, because the Z does represent, obviously, it's a very smooth transition, isn't it? If you think of this, the sound, and it does represent a certain amount of electrical energy. Even like if you look at the pre-Chaldean hieroglyph for Z, which is a sword. So a sword represents the movement of energy, right? Something that can end life, something that's powerful and dynamic. And it's also a symbol of
it's
of
a very
the power of the universe in a sense.
It's a very masculine symbol. So like I mentioned before, so it's interesting is that there's 4 keys, which are 4 masculine Zerfaxes, and there's 4 gates. I think I'm actually gonna get my screen share action again.
It's very interesting as well that you've got these 3 points of the. Let me get that back up there. You got these 3 points of the. Let's just get this right again. How did I get it? I got you such a nice full screen earlier. Then it didn't give me the best full screen experience next time. There we go.
Yeah. So basically the idea is with this system is that we have 4 different keys and we have 4 different gates. And so when you astrally travel to an outer Zarfex, you have to sort of keep this concept in mind, the key and gate concept. So Zith is like the top key, like that's like ultimate, infinite, and then you kind of go downward to Kla, Zhizh, and Biv, and they're sort of corresponding to each one. Like Biv corresponds to O, Zhizh to Yo, Kla to Ra, and Zith to Vith. And what was I going to say about the keys? But yeah, the idea is that you can. What's interesting about this system is you can kind of use sort of any combination you really want, except for the only thing with the Biv Zerfax is that it's sort of the lowest distance key. So if you think of it this, so let's talk about the key Zerfax. So a good example of a Biv Zerfax would be a story, a play, or some kind of event that happens. When a lot of people create stories, they take stuff from the existing world and they put it together to create an experience. Like let's think of like something like, like Star Wars, for example. Like you have a desert planet, you have Ewoks, which are similar to bears, and you take all these ideas but the thing is with the Biv Zerfax is that it doesn't take you outside of the Zarfex. It only can take you to things within our Zarfex is the idea. Then when you get over to Zhizh, that's when you basically, I would say that I think H.P. Lovecraft was able to tap into this Zerfax. That's when you get the weird words, or like a lot of the concepts I come up with, like Zerfax and Zaphriz and Izathola Dakratha and Ajithrazith. These are sort of Zhizh factuals because there's no correlate to any kind of language or perceived thing within this reality. You're taking something that is outside of the Zarfex. But why this is not the highest key Zerfax is because it doesn't really have a return address. It's like you see some kind of weird word or some kind of strange image or place, but you don't know where it actually is. You don't know where it's related in Zarfex space. And that's where Kla comes in. So it's like Zhizh before, where it's weird and it's not from this Zarfex, but this one shows that the key Zerfax, it's foreign, but you can also see how it's linked and interconnected with our Zarfex. So from that, you know where that key leads to. So with Zhizh, it's like a key to a mystery world, and Kla is sort of like an established key that takes you to a Zarfex that you want to go to. And then Zith is just like so freaking powerful. And like basically this takes you to whatever like level or threshold plane beyond what you can comprehend. So it's just like ultimate brain destroying mystery. And then it also, the thing is with these key Zerfaxes is they correlate to these gate Zerfaxes. So Biv is connected to O because O basically kind of takes these stories and it gives them a certain space, a free space to exist in, so they don't necessarily overlap and contradict each other. Whereas with Zhizh, the story then kind of exists outside of the boundaries of the author's writing. So think of like how like a lot of H.P. Lovecraft's like writing, it started out as fiction, but it kind of like weaved its way outside of the pages of the book and sort of intercepted its way into other aspects of life. And I believe it's correlated to the sort of the colored Zerfax because there's obviously a certain quality that it evokes. And then with re and cle, see, the idea is that with the white space, instead of everything being separate, here it's like the internet. You just sort of click, you just sort of type something in, and it just poof magically appears. Everything is just sort of interconnected via this kind of invisible information space. And because you have this sort of like data, you can use this. So the idea with the Clizerfax is that there's one half exists in your Zarfax, and then there's the other half exists in the other Zarfax. And then you use these keys as sort of the bridges to the Zarfax. And then Vith corresponds to Zith, because Vith is sort of like also kind of as a gateway where you're dealing with colors, sensations that seem to be beyond your comprehension. So it's like, if you think of the gate as more of like the feeling and the sort of the general mood and atmosphere, and this is sort of more the intellectual structure, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of a brief overview of key and gate Zerfaxes. Go back to
the O, the O, which interestingly enough has 3 points in your original 28 mansion image, right?
Yeah.
The image before where you've got the 28 mansions or the 28 elements.
Mm-hmm.
And so that 3 aspects keeps bringing me back to, like, there's 3 aspects of the universe. Like when I drowned and I died, there were these 3 things that were taken out of each other.
Mm-hmm.
3 distinct parts. Everything else is just interconnectivity between those 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like there are only 3 extensions that base the reality, and everything else is interactions.
Mm-hmm.
And then that sort of comes back there again, where you've got that as the base, where it goes into the feminine, more feminine, less feminine. On the right-hand side and the left-hand side, more masculine rising and less masculine coming down, which is quite an interesting way of looking at the idea of masculinity and feminine, like 2 sliding scales.
Mm-hmm. Where did I'm gonna pull that image back up again. I had it here. Here it is. Yeah, I figured, like, when it comes to a lot of this stuff, it's like, obviously, like, there's masculine and feminine, but there's different degrees. Some people are more masculine and some people are more feminine than other people. So I figured there's a kind of a dynamic here in which you have like high and low levels of femininity, but also kind of, it talks about, like, you know, different energetic, like, things correlating with each other, things having a certain level of chemistry. And yeah, that's kind of the idea. But it's like, because it's like, but I guess if you think about, like, this is sort of the lower end is sort of like the feminine sort of dimension, and the higher end is the masculine. But what's interesting about this system is it's not like it's or it starts from the top and goes the way down, or it starts from the bottom and goes the way top. Here it starts from the bottom and the top, and then it goes and it meets in the middle. And so the Zerfax. So I guess I should probably also let me see if I have a working diagram of the. So now I can probably talk about the self Zerfax, which is known as the I Zerfax. And I'm going to see if I have a diagram here that explains that. So actually, those diagrams. Here we go. Okay, so this is sort of the basic. So the I Zerfax represents the self, right? And so I didn't really put this down in here, but this top circle right here, this is where Zith interacts. That's the masculine side. And then you have O, this is your gate side. This is where the sort of the feminine collective consciousness. And then Kith is sort of the birth between these two things, that this is where your sort of your individual self is. So if we think about your, so when it was interesting, because you mentioned the idea that there being sort of these 3 sort of joining realities. I'm like, that's essentially the I Zerfax, which is AIE. And that's the Zerfax that's in the middle of, if we go back here, which would be this one, this Zerfax right here. So And then you have the same nodes represented in the middle part. So you have your gate node, your primary node, and then you have your imaginational nodes. So an easy way to conceptualize this, because I know the node thing is kind of a difficult thing to sort of parse with. So the idea with your first node, this is the primary Zerfax that you're having. So when I talked about us existing in certain rooms, this is the first node experience. Everything you see with your physical eyes, your physical ears, your touch, that's your first node experience. The second node is, which is known as the Zith node. This is the when you visualize something, when you have like images in your head, they exist in this Zerfax, or if you're imagining a story as you're writing down. And so there's a whole different Zerfax that you experience when you think about the imaginal, when you read a book, when you, specifically when you read a book and you visualize the elements that are going around you. And then the gate, the third node, represents the feeling. So if you're listening to a piece of music, what kind of vibe do you feel? Do you feel light and cheery? Do you feel dark? And this is more of the feminine feeling sort of Zerfax node. And then all three of these experiences combined create the I Zerfax, which is our coherent, individualized experience, if that makes any sense.
And it's very interesting. It keeps making me think about those 3 O's. I can't stop thinking about those 3 O's, as if those are like transition points where the self is inserted into the program.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense.
There's still a lot of mysteries with this system to uncover. That's for sure. Like I'm kind of like figuring.
It's interesting that. Sorry, yes.
So actually, let me get the screen share again, because I know I keep coming back to this, but I'm gonna do that. So, because I want to point out something that I just discovered like accidentally. So there's the kith and the vith symbol. So the kith is kind of like this sort of triangle shape, but it's kind of like inwardly bent at the middle. And when I was, making these symbols, I was just sort of channeling them based on the sound. But here's what I didn't even realize accidentally. If you look at the vith and you look at it very carefully, how is it similar to the green symbol? Let's see if you can figure this out yourself.
So what are we looking for? The similarity between...
like between this and this. What do you notice any patterns?
Well, it seems like that's the circumference. That's the one, the green one is what it's doing, and the purple one is what it is.
Now here's what blew my mind. If you look really carefully, just kind of the way it's symbol, it's 4 Zerfaxes joined together in a circle. And what's crazy though? I never intended that when I drew that symbol. I did not have that concept in my mind at all. It just happened to work that way. That's what's kind of mind-blowing about some of this stuff, is like all these things you don't even realize like they work. And they're not even like stuff that I intended or that I thought up. It just happened to work that way. And it even makes sense within the context of what these Zerfaxes are. Because if you think of So basically, the best way to think about the Vid Zerfax is, like I mentioned before, about those 3 different types of experiences where you have the 5 sense experience, you have the imaginal experience, and then you have the sort of the feeling emotional experience. What this does is it basically produces a Kid Zerfax for each one of those nodes. So then they all become interconnected, and then it actually creates more perception nodes when you're in the Vid Zerfax state. That's why there's a lot of that sense of being in multiple places at once, or kind of going through, being in several realities at the same time, is because it's kind of like basically think of this as the body, and this is the body through a kaleidoscope, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly how I was seeing it, because it looks like the green one is sort of the expression of what the other one is in one way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like
it's an expression of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like looking at a tree and then seeing one side of the tree, because it's your perspective. If that makes sense. Because
Yeah,
you can't see the whole tree.
it's a definitely and I should also mention this is the difference between I think that like there's so I mentioned before that the Zerfax is a fourth dimensional sort of like sphere. These Vidzerfaxes, these are higher than four dimensional. So you have a whole higher range, and these are actually lower dimensional. These are only three dimensional or lower. So 1 to 3 dimensions. Then you have your fourth dimensional here. Then you have 5 to 8 dimensions. Because once you go beyond 8 dimensions, that's when you're entering a whole different Zarfax, essentially. The idea is that a Zarfax is an 8th dimensional sphere. So you have, and I can explain the 8 dimensions too. So that you have like, you have yourself, which you have your 3-dimensional self, but then you have sort of your alternate realities that exist within the Zerfax. That's your 4th dimensional. Then you have the 5th going this way. Then you have the 6th. And then you have a sort of a meta dimension up here, which is sort of the 7th dimension. And then they all coalesce here in the 8th dimension, where they all sort of intersect as one. So that is I forgot where I was going with that, but and the other thing is they all kind of reflect. Oh, I should also mention how the channels reflect into each other. So we talked about the Azerfax reflecting into the Zaphras channel. So we should talk about the Nezerfax channel, because this is sort of an important concept of understanding the system. This is the Zerfax of both abstract thought and linear time. So when you're thinking, so basically this is when you're lost in thoughts and you're not really connected with the physical world, but you're not really thinking in terms of images. You're just sort of thinking in terms of like abstractions. So like let's say you're thinking of numbers in your head, but you have you're not visualizing anything. You're just sort of like processing things like a computer. This is the Nezerfax channel, and it kind of takes raw data without any kind of like image, which is what's known as an Azerfax, which is like it's just another triangle Zerfax that sort of flow through here like a river. And then when that flow of information crosses through here, it's almost like that information bit gets kind of encapsulated by a sort of a black void. And because it's no longer intellectual, it then becomes an image in the Etherfax channel. I don't know if that's making any sense or not. And then
it does make sense, because it's like putting your hand into the sand, right?
Yeah.
The impression and the expression.
And then so I'm going to talk about the top here, because this sort of represents sort of like physical matter. And so the idea is that when we're sort of in the afterlife, we're sort of in the indeterminate zone, and we have a Vidzerfax. And then when we get incarnated, your Vidzerfax then gets reflected through this sort of Zarfax nucleus point, which it can also represent, and then it finds a correlation spot in the Feezerfax in physical reality. And then once that's sort of embodied here, you then become born into this Zerfax. And then you're basically just like an organism, you're breathing. And then once you start to learn things and you start to learn language and symbols, you then start to gain awareness in these areas. And then once you start to gain awareness in these, you then become aware of your Izerfax. And
I like that. It's interesting, because when I've looked at your diagram right at the beginning, I saw the top as being related to the causal. And the causal is that part of the soul that moves from incarnation to body to incarnation.
Yeah.
So it's the part that is like the Akashic field. Yeah.
It's like the no, actually, I think the Akashic records are a completely different thing, because that they kind of express themselves throughout different Zarfaxes, and that would be more like in the Zarfax nucleus. That's when you get into Zarfax planes. Should I start talking about alternate Zarfaxes? Get into that? If you're or is this, or do you still need to get something?
If that's next on your we've only done an hour and 10 minutes, so we've got another like 50 minutes.
All right, yeah, sure. So So like these three O's that I mentioned before,
Gates,
these represent what type of Zarfex we exist in. So we live in what's known as a solid Zarfex, and it's a solid Zarfex because it has a black O voided membrane. I'm going to get the. I'm actually going to get two diagrams here. I'm going to get. Where is it? I'm going to get the Zorfex map, and then I want to get the four voids explained. So as we can see here, this is the world that exists outside of our Zarfex, and these represent the type of like I mentioned before. So when I mentioned that the Zarfex concept, like a hypersphere, where all these realities and all of our experience intersect into one sort of massive experience sphere, the thing that makes it solid is that it's encapsulated by a black void membrane. And what the black void membrane does is essentially it takes the consciousness and it sort of like crystallizes and freezes it. And so if we go back to like that Feeserfax thing, it's basically taking that Viserfax, which is sort of this moving, undulating fractal. And then what the Feeserfax does is it freezes and crystallizes it into a specific snowflake that can't be changed. And that's kind of the effect that happens in the solid Zarfexes. And we live. And so what these symbols represent are the type of Zarfexes. So each one on the left is the type of Zarfex interior, and the type on the right is the type of indeterminate zone. So here we have a solid Zarfex interior, and we have a fluidic indeterminate zone. And so with the fluid Zarfex, this is more like a Zarfex that's purely a dream world. It's not physical. It's more pure consciousness. Not necessarily pure consciousness, but it's like an astral Zarfex. Like imagine like a Zarfex, but the entire thing, both the Zarfex interior and the indeterminate zone, are just one big, massive primordial astral plane. And then they're part of the and so this Zarfex would then have a colored membrane instead of a black membrane, which then kind of like gives sort of a warmth for the fluid Zarfex to sort of manifest itself. And this is the Zarfex that we're from, or this is, well, there's more than one of each type of these, but these are the types. And the Fae I talked to, they're from this type of Zarfex, the purple one where you have a fluidic indeterminate zone, then you have a gaseous indeterminate zone. Then we have the gaseous Zarfex. Let's see, once you get to the two upper levels, this is the stuff I haven't really figured out yet. There's still a lot to uncover because there's just a lot more out there and figured out. These are your white void Zarfexes. So this is basically, you would think of these, maybe these are formless realms.
So what did you say? White hole?
White void. So like how
white void.
Like here,
white
like
void.
these
Okay.
Zarfexes, they're kind of in a black void. These are in a white void. And so white void doesn't obscure consciousness in the way and crystallize it the way the black void does. So it's just all information, just kind of, it's all super duper interconnected like a highway. It's almost like a weird kind of like text document sort of computer world. And so when you say the Akashic records, that would be the plane that these gaseous Zarfexes, which is called the Ajiferzif. And then at the very top, you have the plasma Zarfexes, the Isotholidocratha. And this is a white one. This has like a fractal membrane. And this is the stuff that connects to the stuff beyond the Zorfex, which is just like, yeah, good luck figuring that out. Like it just scales upward and gets more and more complex. But the idea is these Zarfexes exist in 4 different planes. So you have the Othiuzathothabotho, which is what they call the Great Void. So this is where all the solid Zarfexes exist, and in between them you have all these sort of almost like the Etherfax space. So think of the indeterminate zone diagram I mentioned before. The same pattern manifests itself in the Zarfexes. So this is more like the solid kind of like isolated Zarfexes that are sort of in the void. Whereas in the Zithu Deovlida, think of this as like, I don't know, BushWhisperer in South Africa, you ever had like children's ball pits or stuff like that, like a Chuck E. Cheese? So the best way to think of the Zithu Deovlida,
What do you mean by that? You
like,
mean children's ball pit? You mean the place where all the balls, where the children go and play, and there's balls everywhere?
yeah, it's like that, where there's a bunch of colored
Yeah,
balls.
yeah.
They kind of start. So the Zithu Deovlida is like a void of infinite colored spheres, like an infinite ball pit. And this is sort of the place where the fluid Zarfexes are able to manifest themselves. And the thing about the fluid Zarfexes, we see with the solid Zarfexes, there's these big void gaps in between the Zarf. So the solid Zarfexes are very difficult to access from one Zarfex to another. But in the fluid Zarfexes, they all kind of, the Zarfexes touch each other. So it's very easy to walk from one Zarfex to another. And this is what the Fae seem to do. They travel to a lot of these different Zarfexes. So if I wanted to go to one of these solid Zarfexes, I couldn't go straight from here because there's just a too great a perceptual void. But if I kind of went up and around like this, then theoretically it's possible. So that's what's interesting too. It's like there's all sorts of different sort of interdimensional routes that you can take. And then we have the Ajithra Zith. See, that's this system's equivalent of the Akashic records, essentially. It's this basically this sort of this information void where all ideas and possible potentialities and concepts exist in this kind of white mist that you can just sort of extract like potentially anything out of. And then this is still a big mystery to me. I still need to investigate the Isotholodacrotha more. But my guess, well, one thing I have noticed about this is that when I think of the eye and the Isotholodacrotha, that means that the Iserfaxes, they come from some kind of so to manifest an Iserfax into a world, you start off from the outer Zorfax, then you come into the Isotholodacrotha, and then you sort of work your way down, and then you manifest into here, which is your reincarnation. So there's a lot to so that's kind of a sort of a simple overview of the sort of the outer Zarfex concept. And so like right here, like the 4 void Zarfexes, I kind of have a little diagram for each one to kind of represent what each one sort of means. And also, but these voids, these are also useful in the magic system that they provide. And so once you kind of like understand their sort of cosmology of their world and how the universe operates, then you can start kind of like thinking about how I can use magic and manifesting things and so on and so forth.
Well, that's very interesting. The way you've got these 4 scales that seem to keep working into different. It's almost like you're looking at the same thing, but you're looking at it from different perspectives.
It's like you're looking at it from like
reality.
It's like a blown up kind of like an inflated version of like like the Zarfex map I showed you, but this is at a much higher scale. When you really comprehend how large a Zarfex is, I'm almost like at a point where like, no, it can't be that big. That's impossible. But it really makes you. The one thing that I've noticed about this system is that it can really make you feel small in the center of the cosmos, but kind of in a good way, in that it sort of like relieves some of the sort of the pressure and the anxiety from the world. And I think when it comes to actually like my experiences in these outer Zarfexes, I think one of the things that really it felt so liberating. Like you're really kind of actually outside of samsara for a second, sort of looking down. So if I can think of like a sort of an experience when I looked at when I sort of astral project to the fairy Zarfex, it's like I look back at this world and it's like I'm holding a black sort of like sphere in my hand, and but you're essentially outside of it, because what's interesting about there's so many like angles and places I could talk about. Nonlinear time, I could talk about randomness ratio. There's just so many things. I'm just like, what questions do you have about the system, or what are you interested in?
Well, um, my intention keeps coming back to. Obviously, you've got these 28 aspects, if I can call them that, on the right hand side here,
Mhm.
from Zith and L3 and L2 and L1 naught and L1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you've got what seems to be 3 other aspects, which are actually more than 3. It's more like 8, but it's 3.
Mhm.
It takes up 8 blocks, if I can use it in such a crude term, even though it's
Mhm.
not really.
Yeah, no, you're
It's not
fine.
really. It's more conceptual than that. But I would imagine that the ZL3 on the left hand side and ZN,
Uh-huh.
these two represent sort of what below the firmament, the physicality,
Okay,
right?
so the Uzer. Okay, so this Zerfax right here, this is what's known as the Zerfax. This is basically kind of like. So what happens is every time you go to sleep, this Zerfax, basically the Zarfax interior, kind of you lose your connection to it, and then when you wake up, a new one emerges. So this is essentially. So if I went back here, let's go back to the Azerfax again. So the Azerfax, this represents the space that you are aware of, your route to work, your route to school, all the familiar places you go to, everywhere you can go to where you don't need a map to get there. Essentially, is the best way I think of it. Then in UA, you have all the stuff like you look in history books, you look in atlases, um, external planets, and stuff like that. And so basically the collective human knowledge that you're aware of that
What
exists outside of your own space.
what do you mean by UA? Just if you could
Oh,
move your
because
mouse
this is
there.
this symbol right here.
Okay,
This
right,
is
right,
the
yeah, yeah.
U Zerfax. This is sort of the group or matrix Zerfax. So yeah, I should probably explain what that means. So if you think of the kith as like an individual animal, like let's say this is a squirrel, the U kith represents the entire squirrel species. Or if you think of this as a tree, this is the entire forest ecosystem that it comes from. Whereas with me, this is your intellect, your thoughts, your ideas, and this is sort of like your understanding of like all the philosophers, all the scientists, all the thinkers, and your knowledge of them exist in this Surfax, right? So this ooh basically represents this is like the universe Surfax. So when all these things coalesce into one, they create your own individual universe, which is what I call the this whole thing right here. This whole map is an Iserfax quadrant, and so this Uzerfax here, this determines what is possible to manifest within your Zarfax and within your Zarfax space. So, and belief systems actually have an effect on how this works. So, if you're a skeptical person, you're going to have a very sort of hard, rigid Uzerfax, and not a lot of stuff from the indeterminate zone is going to be able to manifest in the Zarfax interior. If, however, you're somebody that really believes in magic, you're super spiritual, you're going to have a very open, sort of like more Uzerfax and more open to potentialities and more open to possibilities. And then you're going to have more things being able to manifest within the Zarfax interior. So this is basically like everything. So this is like everything we know, and this is everything that's like that we can theorize. So this is a very speculative Zerfax. So it's kind of like if you think about like, let's say this represents the known universe right here, this UA Zerfax. This is sort of, if we take the knowledge and the theories, this is like what alternate things can we speculate exists beyond what we know based on the current understanding of the things we have here. But notice that this is not ultimate reality, but then this Uzerfax then is connected to the Zarfax nucleus, which is the actual ultimate reality. This is this is like your personal reality. This is your personal universe, and this is sort of the ultimate shared collective universe of the Zarfax.
What do you mean by ultimate? Just to give us.
Actually, I don't think ultimate's probably not the right word. I think it was just that's kind of where all this. It's like how I mentioned like all our realities intersecting into one. That's this Zarfax right here, the Zarfax nucleus, where all the things. So think of it. If you think of this as one big circle, this is at the center of it.
The fundamental reality.
Yeah, fundamental reality.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. I love that symbol that you talk to me about this symbol that's in that fundamental reality. What letter is that?
It's, I don't know. I guess it captures the vibe. One thing I noticed about this language is there's a lot of like swirls. Like you notice the swirl here, there's a swirl here, and here, and here. Seems like that kind of like that curl thing is kind of a it's an interesting theme. And what's also interesting that I've kind of noticed is that there tends to be the symbols in the indeterminate zone tend to have more curved lines, whereas I noticed the ones in the Zarfax interior have more straight lines, or they're just more like just regular spheres.
Well, that sort of seems to be a distinction between masculine and feminine, which does sort of make sense.
Yeah,
because I think it's a perspective thing, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing you also have to understand. Like how I mentioned, this is also a direct reflection of this, the indeterminate zone level 4. So basically, you think about, you have the Zith, the male here, but it's sort of interacting with all these female gates at each sort of like sector of the Zarfax nucleus. So there's a kind of, that's why there's a Vith here, because there's a kind of a sexual union between the gates and the keys that sort of manifest and grow the Zarfax we live in. Because at the end of the day, it's kind of, you got to think of the Zarfax as also kind of like a colony of organisms, like the jellyfish, for example. A jellyfish is not one animal. It's technically a bunch of animals or a bunch of organisms functioning as one. And that's kind of how you have to conceptualize the Zarfax, as sort of like, this is sort of like the filter, this is sort of like the body, and this is sort of like the mouth, and that kind of takes in the food and the air, and like your immune system that decides what goes in and what goes out. And then when it's kind of like, so basically it's kind of like it's like an organism. It's like, ooh, these squirrels. Okay, it's like, okay, I like squirrels. They don't contradict my reality. But then it's like, but leprechauns. Ooh, I don't know about leprechauns. That's going to be a little trickier. Or if then you think about, oh my God, a flying Weeble rock. It's like, I don't know how to manifest that. So I'm just gonna give you a bird here. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I sort of conceptualize it.
That is an interesting way of looking at it. And I like that, because it sort of makes a lot of sense to me with how I see the world too. Think of it as Team Zarfax, yeah? Like, because our bodies are like that, 30 trillion cells of our own DNA operating in a synergy with 30 trillion other foreign cells of probiotic, and not all probiotic, some of them are, the body's got to have all sorts of cells in it, doesn't it? In order to be in a state of balance, I suppose it would have to reflect on the inner worlds, would it not?
Yeah.
Each consciousness of each cell, each living consciousness, and then the tissue.
Yeah, but
the organs.
Yep, exactly. And this is why I think I make a distinction between this and this. So when you have a sort of like a what a Kitherfax, it can kind of be like one and many organisms at the same time, where it's like, so when you're in the Kitherfax state, so another like way, like pretty much the best way to enter like a Kitherfax is to be in nature without any clothes on. So there's a sense that your body is almost like an extension of the body of the forest. So there is that sense of you're part of one of many. But when we get down to the lower channel, it then manifests as the singular Iserfact, which then creates the singular sense of self. So instead of being like a trillion or so cells in your body, then it kind of manifests as one singular reality in the Iserfax.
So we're talking essentially, what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing entropy and syntropy. And as we go down, I see entropy separating things into separate units, And as we move upwards, I see syntropy operating to produce a cohesive construct of
it's interconnected at the top, disconnected
expression.
at the bottom. Yeah, exactly. It's more here up at the top. Top layer, everything is more interconnected. Then you get more distinctive and separate as you go downward.
Yeah, it's sort of the two forces of the universe that work.
Yeah, exactly.
Apparently against each other. I don't think they work against each other.
No,
I think they
in
work
this system
with
they
each other.
don't. They're
Yeah, they work with each other
because
they're a team. This is Team Zerflex. It makes a lot more sense than the idea of like the universe is at war with itself, you know.
Right.
But I suppose that's what we want to hear.
Yeah.
You know, or what those that want us to hear things want us to hear, so that we can have an inner war within ourselves
Speaking
and
of,
disconnect us
walls
and make us easy prey.
belief systems, we should probably, before we should make sure we talk about Zurfixes, which is a different thing.
Please do.
So a Zurfix is basically kind of like a how the best way to think it? It's like they're basically made of belief systems, and you see that there. I kind of figure out there's like a pyramid, and what these Zurfixes do is they can actually block access to the outer Zarfexes. So I'm actually going to pull up both of these diagrams at the same time. So
what operating system are you running, by the way?
Windows.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so basically these belief systems kind of so let's take there's 7 different types of. There's the Theoserphites, which is like Christianity. You have the Daelzerphites, which is your magical pagan beliefs. You have the Iserphites. This is more like chaos magic, solipsism, selfish kind of individualistic will magic. Then you have materialist atheism. Then you have kind of like transcendental, kind of like Buddhist Hindu beliefs, which are contrast with these more nihilist beliefs. And then this is sort of like I'll explain that this one after this. So basically what these Zurfixes do is they alter this indeterminate zone. So let's say I'm an atheist and I'm an Ozurfix. So what happens when you're an Ozurfix is, see this section of the indeterminate zone, these all become O's. So this all becomes basically like a block. So this part of the indeterminate zone becomes blocked if you're a low level atheist. And so because of that, you then need a stronger level of experience that's more than just your regular one to cross that threshold. And likewise with that's one way to sort of like block it out. But the other Zurfixes do that too. So with the monotheistic Zurfix is, let's kind of take back these gateways before. So instead of seeing these gateways as a bridge to another dimension, what happens with Zurfix is they take these, because they can't imagine anything beyond it, they put the highest level of their belief system acting as a kind of wall, unintentional wall, that blocks the outer Zurfix. So this white light, if you're in a Theoserphites, you would perceive this is the Christian God. And because there's nothing beyond this Christian God, my imagination is not going to go beyond this threshold. This is where it stops. And likewise with the other Metazurfix is like your Buddhism or something like that says, oh, this whole world is nothing but emptiness. And that same concept applies, because you think, oh, this is nirvana, this is emptiness, this is ultimate reality. I'm not going to speculate and let my imagination grow beyond this threshold. And what Zurfixes do is, if you think of the Zarfix as like a big sphere, think of a Zurfix as almost like a cyst or a pimple that exists on the edge of its surface, that kind of like you're in the astral plane, and each belief system is like a dome that you can enter. But once you're in the dome, it's kind of like one of those fake simulation worlds where it seems like there's nothing outside of the dome. It's very Matrix-like, I guess I would say. And one of the things that you really understand and get beyond that into the outer Zarfexes is that you have to transcend these 7 Zerfixes to sort of actually fully accurately get there. Now, one thing I will comment, because I know probably a lot of our listeners might have some of these belief systems, Zerfixes in themselves, they're not, you don't think of them as like some kind of Gnostic prison. They're not necessarily thought of as good or bad. They just kind of like corral your imagination around a specific fence. Now, you may enjoy being in that particular area of the universe, that particular area of the cosmos. You're happy with it. It gives you a sense of peace and tranquility. It gives you meaning in life, and that's perfectly fine. But if you want to really understand the outer Zarfexes and go into your system, you kind of have to kind of put some of that stuff to the back burner to really open your imagination to the deeper mysteries. So, and then the interesting thing too is each one of these Zerfixes corresponds to a Zarfex channel. So let's take the O Zerfix, the atheism Zerfix, because you spend all of your time thinking very intellectually, very rationally. This is where the O Zerfix sort of manifests itself and kind of like reinforces its thing. The Theou Zerfix is in the A Zerfax channel, because if you think of like Christianity or Judaism, there's always these very strict kind of like universal laws and universal rules. Everybody's got to wear a certain dress code. It's very society based. It's very much about mainstream civilization. So that manifests in this channel. Then we take the Slizerfix, which manifests in the Kidzerfax channel. This is what's known as a metazerfix. So this Slizerfix kind of oversees the Theou and Deo and sees itself. It sees these 2 Zerfixes as being part of itself. So an example of this would be like Buddhism, where it says like, oh, you know, Christianity and paganism, all these religions, they're all part of this same, they're all just different aspects of the same path. And this is your sort of your Slizerfix over here. And because it's a meta Zerfix, it kind of goes off, it exists in 2 different channels because it's not necessarily corresponding with like the inner and outer. It's all as one. So because it doesn't make any distinctions with the I Zerfax, you have that. Then you have the I Zerfix, which is sort of your chaos magic Zerfix. It sees everything. It's corresponding with the E Zerfax channel, and it sees everything as sort of like isolated images. Like you can, I'm going to manifest a sigil of some kind based on some comic book or sci-fi movie I watched. And because of what the Etherfax does, it gives that space in the void for those sort of delusional, narcissistic kind of dreams to manifest, and hence why it's corresponding with the Etherfax channel. The Deo Zerfix, this is sort of your magical believing Zerfix. This is sort of your like astrology, more like your polytheistic belief systems. And because there's sort of this colored void, and it's based on dreams and symbols, that Zerfix is based in this channel. And then the Vlid Zerfix, this is the nihilism Zerfix, and it actually like the meta Zerfix here, it sees these 2 things as being aspects of this. So it sees the sort of the emptiness of this that disregards physical reality, and this disregards the astral reality, and this disregards both as meaningless. And so this is sort of, and it corresponds to the Phi-Zerfax channel, because the thing about the Phi-Zerfax, sort of like the solid Zarfex memory, it also has a black impenetrable membrane. So the idea is that the physical matter Zerfax has this black wall around it where consciousness can't penetrate it directly. And so this is what creates the solidity of the world. But because it's not possible to comprehend, it's not possible to understand, that's why it's associated with the Vlid Zerfix, because out of that unknowable chaos then creates the kind of the fertile bedrock for a sort of nihilistic belief system. And then the Klizerfix. This is the one that's probably the most mysterious, because it sees these 2 things as being part of it. Now, this is just basically simply the Zerfix that says that this Zarfex is the only Zarfex that essentially exists. Because the thing about a Klizerfax, like I mentioned before, is it's essentially kind of like taking 2 Zerfaxes and sort of linking them together. Think about how like So like quantum entanglement would be a good example. So you have like two electrons, and you have them sort of correlate, even though they have a far distance apart, they're correlated with each other. So if one electron moves, the other electron moves in the same corresponding way. But the reason this is a Kliz Zerfikes is because that second half that's connected to the outer Zarfexes has been cut off by this void Zerfax right here. So it's sort of isolated. And then that kind of emanates downward and creates these sort of belief systems that are sort of like, and the reason that Zerfikes exist, it's a solid Zarfex phenomena, is because, you know, the solid Zarfex, it's like there's a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of difficulty sort of navigating it, because like the void nature of this reality kind of makes like consciousness at a sort of a lower level. So the Zerfikes act as a kind of a supplement to kind of help people navigate through the Zarfex. And what's interesting too is that each of these Zerfikes they're kind of like, they're sort of like mini collectives. So all the people, so the Theou Zerfikes, the Christian Zerfikes, it's made up of all the people that believe in Christianity, and they all collectively manifest their own universe together. Or as the atheists, this is the collection of all the atheists in the world collectively manifesting a materialist, soulless, godless reality. And the thing
seven
is that
egregores. Yeah,
you could say that. They're like big egregores. And the idea is that none of these Zerfikes directly correspond with the Zarfex nucleus, and that's kind of why it's important to sort of step outside of it, because you then can sort of have a better gauge of how reality actually works, as opposed to looking at it through these sort of egregoric filters, as you will.
well, that is really interesting, because you can really consider the nature of reality as being all these filters that we see through, sort of like layers of an onion. It's the first thing you notice when you're in an altered state of consciousness. You know, you just keep going in, and just one more layer. Oh, one more layer, and you peel it back. It's 7 layers, and oh, but hold on, within each layer there's a whole lot of layers, and with each one of those layers there's a whole lot of it, and you just.
And so here's an interesting thing. So this right here is sort of like a kind of a layout of the actual Zarfex in itself. And so, like I mentioned, Uzurfaxes before, and so there's 4 different types of Uzurfaxes that you shuffle through, kind of like a hand on a clock. And each one of those Uzurfaxes is sort of correlated with one of these Zerfikes. So if you can think of it, this is sort of the part of the Zarfex where magic is real, gods exist. And this is sort of the lower part. This is where the skeptical parts, this is the more material part of reality. But notice all of these parts are all part of one singular experience sphere. And then once you kind of understand that, and you can start to see both, we're sort of both ordered up here and chaotic down here, it then kind of points to a larger picture. And I have a little guide on the Zerfike subtypes over here on the left side. But what is also interesting is there's a, like, you know how in the Zarfex map, everything about the system is based on the number 4, like mostly, like the number 4 shows up all the time. So Zerfikes have certain intensity levels. So you think about, and I'll correspond to the whole Zerfax theory. So like, let's say we'll go through the Christian different levels of being in a Christian church. So the first level would be simply self-identifying as a Christian, saying, I believe in Christianity, you know, I wear the cross, Jesus. So you've created one Zerfax of belief that sort of like encapsulates your universe. Then when we go to level 2, we go to the knowledge phase. So not only now am I a Christian, I go to church every Sunday, I've read the Bible from front to cover, I've gone to apologetics stat, I've gone to Bible school. And so now, not only do I have one Zerfax of personal identification, I now have an additional Zerfax of a compendium of knowledge and rituals that other people have kind of come up with. And so these first 2 levels, this is the safe level. So you can have a conversation with somebody at the level 1 or level 2 level. They may disagree with you, but you can still get along with them, you know, let bygones be bygones. But when you get to level 3 and 4, that's when it's like, woo, stay away from this person. This is more like, so level 3, this is when you become a fundamentalist Christian. This is when you start to really start to believe that all the non-believers are evil, and that, I'm not even going, this is when you're so immersed in Christianity where it's like, I'm not even going to talk to these filthy non-believers. They're beneath me, or even if you're like, and then when you get to level 4 phase, this is like, oh crap. Like they're like, this is like suicide bomb,
Careful what you say. But yeah,
like
basically people getting up to like, you say that word and will be axed from YouTube.
Oh yeah, I forgot about
people
that.
running around
We'll
with naughty jackets.
This is a level where you unalive yourself. And you're basically like, you're like, basically like, this is like you're willing to kill somebody for your beliefs. It's like you're like almost completely insane at this point. So when you understand it, and you understand too, like each one of these is adding an additional Zerfax of beliefs. So think about your Zerfax before, and imagine that it's like you have like a little sort of, I'm trying to think of a good metaphor here, but like, let's say like each level of a Zerfax is like adding another like a pair of sunglasses to your perception of reality. So you add one level and it gets a little bit more shaded towards the belief system. Then you add another pair of sunglasses that deepens the shading of that. So it's like you have like, imagine like a Zerfax like always in front of your vision. And then if you're level 2, you have like 2 sort of in a row.
And when you got 4, you can barely see it all.
Yeah, you can't. You're at 4, you're completely blind. You're like completely freaking blind. But yeah, I think I've kind of gone over most of the basics of this system, and I will tell you, it actually does get more complex than this. Much more.
We do have another quarter of an hour, and what I did want to ask you about as well, because now we've got like a basic overview of the structure. How do you use this? And I'll specify what I mean. Like you've got, okay, you mentioned magic. So the way I see magic is to alter consciousness at will, and then you reshape your inner reality, which then changes the outer reality. And then you've got sorcery. Sorcery is sort of where you'll have intermediaries, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To do it on your behalf. So how does your magical system of actual of action and workings actually work? Well, how would you conceptualize that?
Well, I think it's a lot about well, it really has to do with the relationship between the Zerfax interior and the indeterminate zone. So basically, magic in a lot of ways is like, let's say I have an intention of some kind. Like I don't know, maybe I want to get some more money or something. And I have the sort of the physical reality. Essentially what this magic system about is like, but there's a number of Zerfax gaps between your desire and its ability to manifest itself. So the system is basically about, how do I minimize the number of Zerfaxes in between my desire and manifesting that desire, if that makes any sense. And the idea is you're taking something from the indeterminate zone, which is your desire, and you're trying to manifest it into the Zerfax interior. And by understanding the law of reflection, understanding how you kind of manifest yourself in different Zerfax channels in order to kind of gain and access different sets of information, it's essentially kind of based on that framework when it comes to manifesting things. In terms of actual magic spells, I think in a lot of ways, it sort of works. Hold on, let me get something. The crazy thing is, like, I'm really more developed theory, and I feel like I haven't really scratched the surface of the actual magic yet. I'm just trying to figure things out. But I want to do a screen share there. I did in my notebook come up with a list of spells or magic words, and then I can see if I can kind of get this there. So if I kind of like, you can say sort of like, so like, for example, we have completion. So we have the word kalethesia, or you have, and so you can, if you memorize like what these things, I have all these different sort of structures. And in terms of how the actual magic works, I'm going to pull up another diagram. I don't have it written on my computer, but I have it in my my notes. Show that real quick right here. So in the solid Zarfex, there exists what's known as the randomness ratio. And so the way to think of the randomness ratio is that like right here, I have a pair of as you can see, a pair of dice in my hand. And I am aware that these dice, they're basically set to random. You roll them.
I was actually going to ask you earlier if you were rolling dice when you were talking to me.
So yeah, like I have like a dice right here, and then and so basically,
do you only use six-sided die, or do you also use 20-sided and
I have some
four-sided?
8-sided die here too.
Ah, nice.
And so basically, you have sort of like one. Just this alone is one Zerfax of randomness. So that would be like 100%. So like, let's say you have a you want to roll a 1 out of 6. And so there's like a certain like 1 out of 6 chance that it rolls, or there's the initial randomness of the object, but then, which is one Zerfax, but then I also have my perception that this is random, which then adds another Zerfax of randomness. And then I also have the perception that there are other people perceive this as random. It's random to them. So that adds a third level of randomness. And then I also realize that I live in a universe where random is thing. And that belief creates a fourth level of randomness. So the idea is that at the default level, the randomness ratio is at like 400%. So that's kind of like a, it's sort of like the idea that there's a mental, there's the actual randomness of the object, but then there's our perceived psychological randomness that is kind of not necessarily there, that you use beliefs to filter through. So here I have a diagram here of how each Zerfix affects the randomness ratio. So if we start with the Theu Zerfix, so the level 1, if you're a level 1, your randomness ratio goes down to 300. If it's level 2, it's 200. It's level 3, 100. So basically the idea is that the deeper your magic is, the less random reality becomes. And then, but when you get to level 4, you get to the negative randomness ratio, which means it's so unrandom that you just become like terrified with paranoia. Everything is a sign. Everything is a demon trying to get you and kill you. But what's interesting thing about this system with the randomness ratio is that higher than average randomness ratio can also affect the Zarfix interior. You can use magic that way, but it works in a different system. So with the lower randomness ratio, you're essentially seeing reality as like, okay, reality is less random, so then I can use my will and my intent to cause manifest things by sort of working with the gods, the local spirits, and et cetera, to manifest it. But with the high randomness ratio, it works differently. So, because what I mentioned before, there's the Ozerfikes. So with this section, we have like the Izerfikes, which is also the skeptical magical Zerfikes. As you get deeper in, the randomness ratio goes up. The same thing with the Ozerfikes, the skeptical ratio. So let's say, for example, what's with you're trying to manifest something with more of that skeptical chaos magic thing. What chaos magic do, instead of making the world magical, they make the Zarfex interior unreal so that it's malleable like a dream. And the more random and unreal and dreamlike it is, then I can kind of almost add an additional layer of randomness to reality that isn't there, and I can manifest my intent that way. But what I realized that's cool about this magical system is that I can use both of these parameters to manifest my will. Because if you're somebody who's a skeptic, like you're kind of like a solipsistic chaos magic, kind of everything is just my will, a lower randomness ratio will actually decrease your ability to manifest things, because thinking like, oh, I can't manifest this thing because I need to go through God and spirits and so forth. But the other way, if you're like a believing person and you have a high randomness ratio, you think, oh, the world is random. There is no spirits. My will isn't going to manifest itself. And this is why, like, when you take skeptics, they have a harder time accepting certain beliefs and ideas. So let's say you have a Christian who's at like a 300% level and an atheist who is at a 500% level. So for the Christian, things are sort of less random than average, but for the atheist, there's this additional level of randomness that further reinforces the skeptical belief system. So that's how but this is how magic works in solid Zarfexes. In fluid Zarfexes, it's a different game. It doesn't use the Vlid-Zerfax ratio because it's not bait, because the realities aren't physical. And so by kind of understanding, so the idea is that, and so I know this may kind of sound to a lot of people like, oh my God, magic isn't real, you know, the world is random. But if you have a low randomness ratio, it might as well be as if magic literally is real. I mean, Slizthia even warned me of like having too low of a randomness ratio when you manifest magic, because you can go deep into paranoia and like terror and like, oh my God, every number, it's like 666, there's demons coming after me. And you can get into that state of mind. So if I think that when it comes to magic, it's understanding those sort of Zarfex mechanics and then utilizing that stuff to your advantage. Now, the interesting thing is it's not just Zerfixes that lower the randomness, but here's the thing. Let's say I'm in a Deo Zerfix, right? And my randomness ratio is at a default of 300%. If I use a magical ritual in addition to being in that Zerfix, it then lowers it down to 200%, because now this ritual creates a Zerfax of unrandomness, which then temporarily lowers my randomness ratio, allowing for the intention in question a higher probability of manifesting. So I guess if I had to think about how this magical system works, I guess that's a somewhat good rundown. Now there's rituals too. I haven't really come up with many rituals, but I do have an Outer Zarfex actual ritual, and I'll kind of explain how that works. Actually, you know what? I have another image that I could show here. It's one of my older ones.
That is quite interesting, though, because it sort of means that if there's a high randomness, there's a very random possibility that it might be just totally unrandom. So that's also random.
It's not random in the same way that. Let's see that. Where is this image? It's one of my older images. I had it here somewhere. Wow, why can't I find this? Is it not in here? Oh, never mind. Here it is. So this is kind of a visual diagram that sort of explains what this I came up with this before I even came up with Zarfexology, but the idea is that if you go off into a some open space and like a field, probably where there's not a lot of people, not a lot of things to bump into, and what you do is you close your eyes, and I like to repeat the magical phrase "Jisho Zithadeo," and just like you kind of do it like in a rhythmic sort of fashion. But what's interesting about magical chants is that it's kind of like jazz, and that you're kind of expected to sort of improvise words. So instead of like, it's what they call like a glossolalia mode. So you use glossolalia to your advantage. So the idea is like you have a magical word, and then you try to come up with words that sound similar to the magical word to sort of complement it. So what you would do in this ritual, you repeat the phrase, the magic word, Jisho Zithadeo, which means spin to another space. So you go into a space, you out in some field or some place where you have a lot of open area to move around. You close your eyes and you spin around slowly in a circle, repeating like Jisho Zithadeo, Jisho Zithadeo, Zavlak Zagabuleva Sabnasa Flavleo, Jisho Zithadeo, Jisho Zithadeo, Zagli Fatuvis Natuvasa Flavleo. And you keep doing that, then you stop. You take a step forward, start spinning in the opposite direction, and repeat the same process. And I usually do this 4 times, but what this actually does is it makes it easier to sort of mentally project to the outer Zarfexes, but what it actually happens is that you start to forget where you're standing in physical space. You don't remember exactly where you are, because that you don't remember exactly where you are. I find it actually becomes easier to visualize. One of the problems I've noticed with let's see, with visualization is like I'll be sitting in my room right here, maybe laying on my bed, and when I close my eyes, I get this strong impression of my room in my third eye, and it's almost like that mental impression of the space I'm in blocks my ability to allow my mind and imagination to sort of astral project. But what this ritual does is, because you don't know where you're standing in relation to the physical room, because your eyes are closed and you've sort of spun around and walked in different directions, you kind of, alternate, then it's almost like that third dimensional sort of like block of the room you're in disappears temporarily, and you have this open window in which you can kind of project your imagination into these outer spaces. And so that's kind of the spin to the other space ritual. It's the only really ritual I've kind of fleshed out. But I would love to figure out more rituals with the Fae, and I'm sure they're enthusiastic. I'm sure Vithuka is enthusiastic to teach me some. But I'm just so fascinated with the theory and like the framework and putting all this stuff together that I almost haven't really had time to really just develop the actual magic itself. I'm just sort of developing the theory and like figuring out the mechanics of it. So,
Wow. So that's been great. And 2 hours flicked by really, really fast. And you did a good job of putting a lot of content into 2 hours. I must have been quite impressed. You crammed it in there.
Easily be 12 hours.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You put a lot in there. It's when you rewatch this,
book about it.
Yeah, you're definitely gonna have to write volumes. But I think that's a really great introduction. We might have to do a sequel at some point.
Yeah, I'd be
down.
to
digest this.
Get to Starfexology lesson 2.
Yeah, you should start a YouTube channel and start making smaller 10-minute or 10 minutes. I always think people like 10 minutes is a good way to get people ramped in,
If I do a YouTube channel, I'm thinking I want to get a dry erase board so I can draw this stuff as I'm explaining the concepts. I think that would be really helpful.
Well, that's not so hard to do.
No, it's not hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been really, really great introduction and interesting, like you say, this the idea of and then I suppose there's going to be more possibilities, because if you think of all of those different aspects as being beings, then you could coerce them all to join you in your plan. If that makes sense, like, hey, I've got a plan. Let's do this together.
Yeah, no, they definitely collaborate for sure.
And you coerce all the Zarfexes to like join you on your plan.
Yeah.
And then that would be the outcome you were looking for, right? If everybody gets, well, you would hope so, because obviously there's a perspective shift between the different elements. Shapes and
I figure one more thing before we go. Maybe I could share the name of some of some of these Zarfexes and what they sound like. I have somewhere in this particular notebook. All right, so we got like so we have like Krelujo, which is like a sort of a Zarfex. It's like an infinite sort of green forest. You have Ezethia, which is where the Fae spirits I talked to come from. It's like kind of like purple and yellow. Then you have other ones like the blue water Zarfex, like Vifluvia, Zildranzigak, Nyarlac, Bluzibo, Aragulakan, Janyaru, Trigenelek, Aradliat, Arugliak. So they have a lot of like, and that's the other thing about this system of magic is it really compels you to come up with your own words for things. One of the things I notice about a lot of these magical systems and why they don't really kind of go out further is because it's like you're set to a certain like vocabulary. You're limited to a vocabulary of a particular belief system, a particular metaphysical mapping. And I find that when you sort of channel new words, you channel new concepts, you are able to actually kind of bridge outside of those Zerfixes and kind of enter that Jizerfaxtal outer Zarfax space. And that's one of the things about like okay, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, there's a lot of like cool stuff like that. And there's still like tons of other Zarfaxes I haven't explored. Probably potentially infinite numbers of Zarfaxes in our Zorfax. And but that's why, like, you know, like I always think to myself, like, just from a philosophical sense, like, you know, why I don't really think there's an end to the spiritual journey, because it's like there's so much space to explore and so many things to see. And it's like once you kind of think the outer Zarfax is, you're looking at this reality like, oh, I'm done with the reincarnations. I'm done with light. I'm like, are you kidding me? It's like there's still so much out there, man. We're not even close to done here. So yeah, this has been fun. I definitely would love to do another talk like this at some point. Kind of go deeper into the lore and the methodology.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of it. We might do a series of them over the course of the next couple of months. We might do more than one.
Yeah, definitely.
If you've got the time. But thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Godspeed. I hope you keep channeling more interesting tidbits of
you know, I think what we could do maybe one time. I was thinking about this idea, like maybe we could get like a some people in like a live chat or a comment, and so you've seen me do the channeling process with the Fae, where I have them talk in Telegram. I feel like with this StreamYard, I could like basically kind of like, for some reason I can't interact it, but anyway, the idea that I can kind of like you would say an answer and I can type their responses, and then maybe you and some of the other viewers can have a conversation with the Fae spirits. See, I love the text method. Like, I don't like when this is just kind of a personal preference, but some people like they chant like Bashar, who kind of like, you know, bursts out the channeling things out loud, like he says the message. Well, one, it's kind of weird because the spirits are feminine. It's going to come weird coming from a man's voice. But the other thing that I like about using text to channel is that when the person is reading the words of the spirit, they actually get a chance and an opportunity to hear the voice of the spirit themselves, and that they actually can take part in the channeling process themselves just by reading what the spirits have said. And instead of like just hearing my voice, it's like they can, it's like when they read what like Kathiza or Vizuka or Slizia said, they get a chance to actually hear the Fae themselves. And so that's why I like the text version of channeling, and plus for some reason I can type really fast too when I'm in that state, so it just kind of pours out of me.
Oh, you can type fast, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
That's useful.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like an exciting little adventure. We'll have to do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, God bless you, brother. It's been absolutely wonderful. It's been an honor having you on the show. I think this is going to be able to be a single cut. It's not too long.
It's 2 hours. It's 2 hours and 8 minutes.
Yeah, it's good to go.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it will be overwhelmingly long, but have an absolutely gorgeous day. And to all of you, I hope you enjoyed it. This
you too,
will
man.
be the first of a series by the looks of things.
Yeah.
And blessings
I
to you,
told
dear
you
brother.
there's a lot of stuff.
Excuse me?
I told you there's a lot of stuff in this.
Well, yeah, but this was a great introduction because it was quite sort of comprehensive.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And it's probably something people might want to rewatch a couple of times.
Maybe, yeah.
Because the first run through will just give people like probably be a lot of pausing and rewinding, you know. But it's really great. It's really, really great. You know what I'm going to recommend to you?
What?
having a message board somewhere, like that you've got somewhere, you can make it online, but you can make it that like it's not available to the public, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Like just organize ideas, you mean?
Yeah. Well, while you're talking, you could have like a big message board up where there's everything up, so that you don't have to switch between the images. You can just sort of flow through it. Very interesting to create like one compass image that encompasses all of the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I actually, believe it or not, that that Zarfex map that I show you, I actually have like a picture of it I drew on my wall, so I always have something to look at. So that's been kind of
Okay,
useful. Yeah.
that makes sense. That makes total sense. If you put it on a tree, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I almost feel like I'm kind of like this feels like I don't really need. I don't know if I'm going to say this, but like when it comes to Kabbalah, I'm kind of like thinking. I know this is a little bit of hubris to say, but I think it's a little bit more comprehensive than Kabbalah because it covers a lot more areas that like the Kabbalah doesn't talk about. Just like more like it talks about these big like mystical states of mind, but it doesn't talk about like more everyday kind of mundane states of mind. Just like, oh, I had the weird random dream that didn't make sense, or I just had this random image of some guy, or like where do you go when you're in like a haunted house or something. That's what the Shizarfax is, which that's one I'm still kind of researching, but it's an interesting one where it bridges the gap between the Zarfex interior and the indeterminate zone based on the location or something like that. So yeah.
Interesting that you say about the location and the dance, because the dance is what makes you leave your body.
Mm-hmm.
Because you, like you say, you're in a constant state of motion, and you're not really focused on where you are. You're sort of between here and there,
Mm-hmm.
in a constant state of flux, which means your consciousness is in flux, which means you're in a state of potential rather than state of specified being.
Yeah.
You're in a state of, I could potentially be this, I could potentially be there,
Mm-hmm.
it could potentially be here or in this manner, which means I could potentially be there or here.
It's like gardening.
But big love to you, brother. Big work. Excellent start. Take it easy.
All right,
Thank
too,
you
man.
all for joining us. And yeah, keep watching. There'll be more of this. Oh, before we go, where can people find you? Do you have a plug anywhere yet?
I don't really have any like website or anything, but I do have a Bandcamp, Cosmic Zebra, Cosmic with a Z, Bandcamp.com, and I have a SoundCloud, which is also Cosmic Zebra, same spelling. So it's just basically like I do music as well. So it's kind of like it kind of complements sort of like the philosophy just in terms of like tone and like weird mysteriousness. So people want to like maybe like give that a listen and kind of like raise that up for now. But other than that, I don't really have anything specific.
That's a Bandcamp, yeah.
Yeah, Bandcamp. I don't really have anything related to this that I can plug at the moment. But when I do, I'll definitely let people know where to find it.
Have you thought of making a channel or a channel?
Like a blog or something like that. I've been thinking about doing that. Yeah.
The channel is quite useful on Telegram because Telegram is probably the best thing to do because it's very cheap to have
a glossary of some of the terms in what's it called a Zarfexology like channel, which is not as you interact with, but I have some notes there and some stuff about like definitions of certain terms and words that can be useful and helpful.
Well, God bless you, brother. You'd be definitely maybe thinking about putting some content on a particular place. Might be a good idea.
The best method for that.
But we'll see you on the round table, so you'll be able to also let people know once you've got a board somewhere, if we can call it that, like a message board of sorts, informative board. Thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you've had a great day and got what you came for. Zarfexology. I hope I said that right.
Yeah.
Zarfexology. This was the Cosmic Prankster. Honor having you on the show.
Honor being here.
And big blessings to you all. Om Shanti.
Peace out.